Imagine walking into a beauty salon, excited for a little self-care, only to be met with cold stares, dismissive whispers, and outright rejection. That's exactly what happened to this seemingly ordinary woman, until she dropped a bombshell that left everyone in the room speechless. What they didn't know? She wasn't just another customer, she owned the entire franchise. Stick around, because this jaw-dropping story of grace, power, and ultimate justice will blow your mind. Want more powerful stories that inspire and surprise? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment like this one. Join us for more unforgettable content. The beauty salon buzzed with energy on a crisp morning, its glossy interior gleaming under the warm light of chandeliers. The chatter of women filled the air, mingling with the hum of hairdryers and the faint strains of jazz playing softly in the background. Mirrors reflected meticulous hairstyles, manicured hands flipping through fashion magazines, and the confident strides of stylists moving from station to station. It was a place designed to exude luxury, catering to a clientele that thrived on exclusivity and polish. Miss Eleanor stepped in quietly, her entrance almost unnoticed amid the commotion. She wasn't the kind of customer who usually walked through those doors. Her clothes were plain, her shoes scuffed, and she carried herself with a simplicity that seemed at odds with the salon's opulent setting. Her silver hair framed a face lined with years of experience, her brown eyes steady and observant as they took in the room. For a brief moment she lingered by the reception desk, her presence an unexpected contrast against the sleekness of her surroundings. The receptionist, a young woman with impeccably styled hair and an air of practiced poise, glanced up from her screen. Her smile faltered, then tightened into something forced. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone just polite enough to be professional but with an edge of impatience. "I'd like a wash and set," Eleanor said, her voice soft yet firm. The receptionist hesitated, her eyes flickering over Eleanor's modest appearance. "We're fully booked today," she replied, though the appointment book on the counter lay open, displaying several available slots. A well-dressed woman who had entered just moments before was already being escorted to a chair without hesitation. Eleanor's lips curled into a faint smile. "That's unfortunate," she said, her tone calm, almost conversational. "I was hoping to get a quick service, but I can wait if that's necessary." The receptionist frowned, clearly uncomfortable under Eleanor's steady gaze. She flipped through the book with exaggerated effort, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the pages. "I'm afraid we don't take walk-ins," she said finally, looking up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's appointment only." Behind the counter, the salon manager observed the exchange with a slight smirk. She was a tall woman with a sharp bob and an even sharper tongue, her presence commanding attention. Dressed in a tailored suit that accentuated her authority, she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone dripping with insincerity. "No problem at all," Eleanor replied, her smile never wavering. "Just trying to see if there's a spot available. I don't mind waiting." The manager gave her a once-over, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes betraying a flicker of disdain. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have a very specific clientele here," she said, her words slow and deliberate, as though explaining something to a child. "We cater to certain expectations." Eleanor's smile widened slightly, though there was a glint in her eyes now, something unreadable. "And what kind of expectations might those be?" she asked, her voice even, as though genuinely curious. The manager hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Well," she said after a moment, "we focus on providing a premium experience. It's not exactly what you might find elsewhere." "I see," Eleanor said simply, her tone giving nothing away. She glanced around the salon, her gaze lingering briefly on the junior staff members bustling about, their faces tight with concentration. One young woman, who couldn't have been more than 25, met Eleanor's eyes and quickly looked away, her expression a mix of discomfort and sympathy. The manager shifted, clearly eager to end the interaction. "Perhaps there's a place downtown that might be more suited to your needs," she said, her smile as sharp as her tone. Eleanor inclined her head slightly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Perhaps," she said, but the faintest trace of something, humor maybe or quiet amusement, flashed across her face before she turned and walked toward a seat near the waiting area. She sat down gracefully, smoothing the fabric of her skirt with hands that bore the marks of a lifetime's work. The room buzzed on around her, but for a moment, the receptionist and manager exchanged uneasy glances. Eleanor simply folded her hands in her lap and waited, her presence both understated and oddly commanding. Eleanor sat quietly, her hands resting lightly on her lap as she observed the room. The salon carried on with its orchestrated chaos, though every so often, a curious glance flickered her way. To the others, she was just an outsider, a woman who didn't belong in this world of polished nails, sleek hairstyles, and whispered gossip about vacations and designer brands. But Eleanor's gaze wasn't idle. It moved with purpose, taking in the details, the staff's hurried movements, the slight disorganization at the front desk, and the customers' whispered complaints that went unnoticed by the stylists. At the front counter, the receptionist kept glancing over her shoulder, her discomfort palpable. The manager, meanwhile, had resumed her position of authority, barking out instructions to the junior staff with a tone that teetered between condescension and exasperation. "Carmen!" the manager snapped at one of the younger stylists, a petite woman with curly hair tied back into a tight ponytail. "The client in chair 3 is still waiting on her color. What's taking so long?" Carmen flinched at the sharpness of the manager's voice but nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I'll check on it now." Eleanor's eyes followed the young stylist as she scurried toward the back, her face flushed with embarrassment. There was something familiar in her nervous energy, a sense of wanting to do everything right but constantly feeling on edge. Eleanor's gaze lingered for a moment before shifting back to the front. 2 chairs away, a customer whispered to her friend, her voice just loud enough to carry. "I can't believe she just sat down like that. Doesn't she know this place is exclusive?" Her friend chuckled softly. "Maybe she got lost on her way to the discount salon." Eleanor heard them, but her expression remained neutral. Years of facing such comments had taught her the power of silence. People often revealed far more about themselves when you simply let them speak. Across the room, Carmen returned from the back with a small tray of products, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the waiting customer. Eleanor noticed the way the manager's eyes followed her, sharp and critical, ready to pounce on the smallest mistake. The junior stylist's tension was almost palpable, her every movement careful and deliberate, as though she were walking on a tightrope. "Careful, Carmen," the manager said, her voice low but pointed. "This isn't amateur hour." "Yes, ma'am," Carmen murmured, her cheeks flushing. Eleanor shifted slightly in her chair, her fingers brushing the fabric of her skirt. There was a time when she had been in Carmen's shoes, young and eager, trying to prove herself in a world that seemed determined to push her down. She recognized the fear in the girl's eyes, the weight of expectations bearing down on her shoulders. It was a weight Eleanor knew well. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the salon seemed to shift. More customers arrived, greeted with the same overzealous enthusiasm that had been so noticeably absent when Eleanor walked in. She watched as the manager poured on the charm, her tone saccharine and her smile wide, all while maintaining a veneer of superiority. Finally, the receptionist leaned toward the manager, whispering something that caused the older woman's eyes to narrow. The manager glanced in Eleanor's direction, her lips pressing into a thin line. Whatever the receptionist had said, it clearly wasn't flattering. The manager strode toward Eleanor with measured steps, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Stopping a few feet away, she crossed her arms and tilted her head, a smile that didn't reach her eyes curving her lips. "Ma'am," she said, her tone falsely sweet, "I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to leave. We really don't have time to accommodate walk-ins today." Eleanor met her gaze calmly, her expression unreadable. "I told your receptionist I don't mind waiting," she said softly. "Surely you can squeeze in a simple service." The manager's smile faltered slightly before she recovered. "As I said, we have standards to maintain. We cater to a very specific clientele, and I'm afraid you don't quite fit the profile." For the first time, a flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed Eleanor's face. She tilted her head slightly, studying the manager with a look that was both patient and probing. "And what profile might that be?" she asked, her voice light but with an edge that hinted at a deeper meaning. The manager blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the question. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she cleared her throat and straightened her posture, her tone growing brisk. "I think it's best if you find another salon. There's a lovely one downtown that might be more suited to your needs." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. "Downtown, you say? I'll have to keep that in mind." The room seemed to hold its breath as the exchange hung in the air. The manager gave a curt nod and turned on her heel, her shoulders stiff with tension. Eleanor, however, remained seated, her posture as composed as ever. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and resumed her quiet observation, her expression giving nothing away. But behind her calm exterior, something was shifting. The room may have dismissed her, but Eleanor knew her time was coming. And when it did, the world of this little salon would never be the same. The hum of the salon continued, but tension lingered like a faint shadow in the air. Eleanor remained in her seat, calm and steady, while the staff tried to pretend she wasn't there. Whispers flitted between customers, their voices low but not low enough to escape her ears. The junior stylist, Carmen, glanced at Eleanor occasionally, her eyes flickering with an uneasy mixture of pity and curiosity. The manager, now back at her desk, stole glances at Eleanor from time to time, her expression tight. She seemed agitated, perhaps unsettled by Eleanor's refusal to leave quietly. Her authority, carefully cultivated and rarely challenged, was fraying at the edges. Eleanor's gaze, meanwhile, wandered. She watched the stylists move about the room, their hands swift and practiced, their interactions tinged with subtle hierarchies. She noticed how the more experienced staff commanded attention, while the younger ones, Carmen in particular, seemed to move in their shadows, working diligently but receiving little acknowledgement. She noted the small inefficiencies in the salon's operations, a customer waiting too long for a stylist, a misplaced product left on the counter, the faint tension between staff members that suggested more than just a busy day. A customer near Eleanor leaned forward in her chair, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone polite but edged with curiosity. "Are you waiting for someone?" Eleanor turned toward her, a small smile softening her features. "No, I'm here for a service," she said simply. The woman blinked, clearly surprised. "Oh," she said, her brows lifting. "It's just, well, they don't usually take walk-ins." "So I've been told," Eleanor replied, her tone mild. "But I've found that patience often pays off." The woman hesitated, unsure how to respond. She glanced toward the manager, who was watching the interaction with thinly veiled irritation, and then back at Eleanor. "Well," she said finally, "I hope you don't have to wait too long." Eleanor nodded graciously. "Thank you." As the woman turned back to her friend, Eleanor caught sight of Carmen approaching from the back room, balancing a tray of supplies. The young stylist's hands shook slightly as she walked, and Eleanor noticed a faint red mark on her wrist, as though she'd accidentally brushed against something hot. Carmen paused near the waiting area, her eyes darting to Eleanor as though she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, after a moment of hesitation, Carmen leaned down slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They shouldn't have treated you like that." Eleanor looked up, her eyes meeting Carmen's. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a shared history of being underestimated. Eleanor's smile was kind, but her words were pointed. "Thank you, dear," she said softly. "It takes courage to speak the truth." Carmen straightened quickly, her face flushing as she hurried back to her station. Eleanor watched her go, the girl's quiet bravery leaving a faint warmth in her chest. It reminded her of herself at that age, young, eager, and trying to navigate a world that often seemed determined to undermine her. Across the room, the manager caught sight of Carmen whispering to Eleanor and called out sharply, "Carmen, are you finished with chair 3? You don't have time to chit-chat." Carmen's shoulders tensed, but she nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice subdued. She disappeared into the back room, her movements hurried and deliberate. Eleanor's gaze followed her, her smile fading slightly. She had seen that look before, the quiet resignation of someone trying to survive under the weight of someone else's control. It was a look she had vowed long ago to never let linger in her own eyes. For the next few minutes, the salon buzzed on, though Eleanor's quiet presence continued to cast a subtle ripple through the room. She remained still, her patience unyielding, as the staff and customers moved around her, pretending she wasn't there. But beneath the surface, the cracks were beginning to show. A high-pitched laugh rang out near the front as a new customer entered, her designer purse swinging over her shoulder. The receptionist greeted her with exaggerated enthusiasm, her voice bright and welcoming. "Welcome back, Mrs. Langford. We've got your usual stylist ready for you." Mrs. Langford swept into the salon with an air of confidence, her perfectly tailored outfit and immaculate hair marking her as one of the salon's most valued clients. As she passed Eleanor, she paused briefly, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. Then, with a faint nod, she turned toward the manager. "Miranda," Mrs. Langford said, addressing the manager, "is everything all right? You seem on edge." Miranda, the manager, forced a smile. "Oh, everything's fine," she said quickly. "Just a bit of a busy morning, that's all." Mrs. Langford's gaze flickered toward Eleanor again, her expression unreadable. "I see," she said slowly. "Well, I do hope you're maintaining the standards I've come to expect." "Of course," Miranda said, her smile tightening. "Always." But as Mrs. Langford moved toward her usual station, Eleanor caught the faintest shift in the manager's posture, a flicker of unease that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression serene. She had no intention of leaving, not yet. She had come to see, to listen, and to wait. And when the moment came, she would make herself known. As Eleanor sat patiently in the corner, the rhythm of the salon continued. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The manager, Miranda, busied herself with tasks that seemed increasingly unnecessary, her movements stiff, and her sharp eyes darting toward Eleanor at every opportunity. It was clear she was unsettled by the older woman's quiet persistence. Eleanor, however, remained composed, her gaze calm and steady as she observed the room. Carmen returned to the front carrying a tray of freshly folded towels. She moved quickly, her steps deliberate, but Eleanor noticed the faint quiver in her hands as she worked. The young stylist passed near Eleanor's chair, and for a moment their eyes met again. Carmen hesitated, her lips parting as though she wanted to speak, but a sharp look from Miranda across the room stopped her. She ducked her head and continued on, her shoulders hunched slightly as she disappeared into the back. Eleanor turned her attention to Miranda, who was now engaged in an animated conversation with Mrs. Langford. Her tone was bright and effusive, a stark contrast to the coldness she had shown earlier. Eleanor couldn't help but smile faintly. People like Miranda had always fascinated her, not for their arrogance or cruelty, but for their fragility, hidden beneath layers of pretense. They worked so hard to maintain control, yet it slipped through their fingers the moment something unexpected challenged them. The sound of a raised voice drew Eleanor's attention to a nearby station. A customer, a middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed hair, was complaining loudly about the service she had received. "This isn't the level of professionalism I expect," the woman said, her tone sharp. "I've been coming here for years, and this is unacceptable." The stylist, a young man with a nervous smile, stammered an apology, but the woman waved him off impatiently. "I don't want excuses," she snapped. "I want this fixed. Now." Miranda was at her side in an instant, her expression smoothing into one of practiced concern. "Mrs. Fletcher," "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," she said, her voice dripping with honeyed charm. "We'll take care of this right away." Eleanor watched the exchange with quiet interest. Miranda's ability to pivot between charm and disdain was impressive in its own way, though Eleanor couldn't help but notice the cracks in her facade. The more Miranda tried to exert control, the more obvious it became that she was grasping at straws. As Miranda worked to soothe Mrs. Fletcher's temper, another stylist approached Eleanor hesitantly. She was older than Carmen, with an air of quiet confidence that suggested years of experience. "Ma'am," she said gently, her tone respectful, "is there anything I can do for you?" Before Eleanor could respond, Miranda's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Sylvia," she called sharply, her eyes narrowing. "I don't believe this is your client." Sylvia glanced at Eleanor, her brow furrowing slightly, before turning back to Miranda. "She's been waiting a while," Sylvia said, her tone even. "I thought I might be able to help." Miranda's smile was tight, her eyes flashing with irritation. "We have a system in place," she said, her words clipped. "Please focus on your scheduled clients." Sylvia hesitated, clearly torn, but a subtle shake of Eleanor's head stopped her. "It's all right," Eleanor said softly. "I don't mind waiting." Sylvia nodded reluctantly and returned to her station, though her expression was troubled. Eleanor's gaze followed her for a moment before shifting back to Miranda, who was now glaring in her direction. Eleanor met her eyes calmly, her smile faint but unyielding. Miranda turned away quickly, her shoulders stiff, but it was clear she was rattled. Eleanor could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the counter just a little too tightly. For all her bluster, Miranda was beginning to crack under the weight of Eleanor's silent presence. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still Eleanor remained. She watched as the salon's carefully curated facade began to unravel, piece by piece. Carmen spilled a tray of products near the back station, drawing a sharp rebuke from Miranda. A customer near the front complained about being ignored by the receptionist, her voice rising in frustration. Even the air seemed heavier, the hum of activity tinged with an undercurrent of unease. Finally, Eleanor shifted in her chair, her movements deliberate. She smoothed her skirt with practiced grace and stood, her presence commanding attention even without a word. The room seemed to pause, eyes turning toward her as she walked slowly toward the front desk. Miranda straightened, her expression guarded. "Is there something I can help you with?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. Eleanor's smile was faint but unwavering. "I've been observing your salon," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "It's quite enlightening." Miranda blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Enlightening?" she repeated, her tone faltering slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her eyes sharp and steady. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You will." And with that she turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind a room that suddenly felt much quieter than it had moments before. The door chimed softly as Eleanor exited the salon, her calm, measured steps fading into the outside world. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension, the uneasy energy that she left behind lingering like an unseen specter. Miranda stood frozen for a moment, her polished veneer faltering. She forced herself to recover, brushing off the strange interaction as she returned to her station. "She's gone now," Miranda muttered under her breath, her words more for herself than anyone else. But as she turned back to Mrs. Langford, who sat flipping through a glossy magazine, the customer raised an eyebrow. "That woman," Mrs. Langford said, her tone carrying a note of curiosity. "She seemed familiar." Miranda's mask of confidence slipped slightly, a shadow of doubt flickering across her face. "Familiar?" she repeated, her voice carefully measured. "I doubt that." She looked out of place. Mrs. Langford narrowed her eyes thoughtfully, her fingers idly tapping against the magazine. "Perhaps," she said slowly, her tone implying she wasn't entirely convinced. "But I've learned that appearances can be deceiving." Miranda forced a tight smile. I'm sure it's nothing. Let's focus on getting your usual service started, shall we? Mrs. Langford didn't respond immediately, her sharp eyes lingering on the door Eleanor had walked through. Then, with a faint shrug, she closed the magazine and leaned back in her chair, allowing Miranda to resume her performance of attentiveness. Meanwhile, in the back of the salon, Carmen leaned against the wall near the supply shelves, her breath shaky. The interaction with Eleanor had left her unsettled in a way she couldn't quite articulate. There had been something about the older woman, her calmness, her composure, that felt different, almost powerful. Carmen had wanted to say more, to ask questions, but Miranda's constant shadow loomed too large. Sylvia appeared beside her, placing a hand on Carmen's shoulder. You all right? Sylvia asked gently, her voice low enough not to carry. Carmen nodded quickly, though the tension in her body betrayed her unease. Yeah, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm fine. Sylvia studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. That woman, she said softly. She's not like the usual walk-ins, did you notice? Carmen nodded again, more slowly this time. She had this way about her, like she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Sylvia's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes thoughtful. People like that don't walk into places like this without a reason, she said, almost to herself. I wonder what hers is. Carmen glanced toward the front of the salon, where Miranda was now laughing too loudly at one of Mrs. Langford's jokes. She didn't deserve the way Miranda treated her, Carmen murmured, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Sylvia gave her a sidelong glance. None of us do, she said quietly. But some people thrive on making others feel small. It's how they keep control. Carmen looked down, her hands twisting nervously. She had always admired Sylvia's quiet strength, her ability to speak truth even when it wasn't easy. But Sylvia had also learned when to keep her head down, when to choose her battles. It was a balance Carmen was still trying to find. Before either of them could say more, Miranda's sharp voice cut through the air. Carmen, towels aren't going to fold themselves. Carmen flinched, the moment shattered. She nodded quickly and hurried toward the supply room, leaving Sylvia standing alone, her expression heavy with unspoken thoughts. As the afternoon wore on, the salon settled into its usual rhythm, but the memory of Eleanor's presence lingered like an echo. The staff moved a little faster, the conversations a little quieter, as though her silent observation had left them exposed in ways they couldn't quite articulate. Out on the street, Eleanor walked with the same unhurried pace, her mind turning over the details she had observed. The disorganization, the strained staff, the cracks in the facade, it all painted a clear picture. This salon, despite its glossy exterior, was a house of cards waiting for the right moment to collapse. She paused at the corner, glancing back at the salon. A faint smile tugged at her lips, one that held both humor and determination. Let them simmer, she murmured to herself before turning and continuing down the street. There was still more to see, more to prepare. The time for revelations would come soon enough. The sun dipped lower in the sky as the salon's hustle continued into the late afternoon. The earlier buzz had given way to a quieter hum, but the tension remained palpable. Staff moved about with forced cheerfulness, trying to mask the unease Eleanor's visit had left behind. Miranda, for her part, kept glancing at the door, as though half expecting the older woman to return. Her usual air of control seemed frayed, her clipped instructions carrying an edge of irritation. Carmen, meanwhile, found herself replaying her brief exchange with Eleanor in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the woman than met the eye. Her calm, her confidence. It had been unlike anything Carmen had seen in her time working at the salon. And then there was that lingering question. Why had Eleanor come here? As Carmen folded the last of the towels in the back room, Sylvia appeared again, leaning against the doorway. Still thinking about her? Sylvia asked, her voice low and knowing. Carmen hesitated before nodding. Yeah, she admitted softly. There was something about her. like she was watching everything but wasn't in a rush to act. Sylvia smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. People like her don't just show up without a reason. Mark my words, Carmen. There's more to this than what we're seeing. Carmen glanced toward the front where Miranda's voice carried through the salon, brisk and commanding, as she oversaw a stylist fixing a customer's updo. You think Miranda knows something? Carmen asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. Sylvia's smile faded slightly, and she folded her arms. Miranda's good at reading people, she said carefully. But she's also blinded by her own ego. That's why she dismissed Eleanor so quickly. People like Miranda see what they want to see and miss everything else. Carmen frowned, Sylvia's words settling heavily in her mind. So, what do we do? She asked, her voice small. Sylvia met her gaze steadily. We wait. And we watch. Meanwhile, Eleanor had made her way across town, her measured steps leading her to a quiet corner cafe. She ordered a cup of tea and settled into a booth by the window, her gaze distant but thoughtful. The memory of the salon lingered in her mind, every detail carefully catalogued. She could still see Miranda's tight smile, hear the clipped edge in her voice, and feel the weight of Carmen's unspoken fears. Eleanor sipped her tea slowly, savoring the warmth as she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The salon wasn't just another business to her. It was a piece of something much larger, a part of the empire she had built, brick by brick, through decades of hard work and perseverance. An empire she had designed to be a sanctuary, a space where women of all backgrounds could feel beautiful and valued. But that particular location had strayed far from her vision. She had known it for some time, of course, the reports from corporate audits, the whispers from customers, but seeing it for herself had been something else entirely. The cracks were wider than she had anticipated, and they ran deep. A faint smile tugged at her lips as she set her cup down. The time had come to address those cracks, to remind the people in that salon who truly held the reins. But she wasn't in any rush. The best lessons were delivered with precision and purpose, and Eleanor had long mastered the art of patience. Back at the salon, Miranda's frustration continued to simmer. A slight mistake by one of the stylists, a spilled bottle of product, sent her into a sharp tirade that left the younger woman blinking back tears. Carmen, watching from the sidelines, clenched her fists, her stomach twisting with anger. Sylvia stepped in, her voice calm but firm. It was an accident, Miranda, she said evenly. No need to make a scene. Miranda turned on Sylvia, her eyes flashing. And who put you in charge of discipline? She snapped. If you spent half as much time on your own work as you do meddling, maybe you'd be more useful. Sylvia didn't flinch, her gaze steady and unyielding. Respect works better than fear, she said quietly. You might want to try it sometime. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut. Miranda glared at Sylvia for a long moment before spinning on her heel and stalking toward her office, slamming the door behind her. Carmen exhaled shakily, her admiration for Sylvia growing. How do you do that? She whispered. How do you stand up to her like that? Sylvia's expression softened slightly. Because someone has to, she said simply. And because people like Miranda only have power if you let them. Carmen nodded, her resolve hardening. For the first time she felt a flicker of courage, small but steady. Eleanor's presence had planted a seed, and Sylvia's quiet strength was nurturing it. Eleanor finished her tea and left the cafe, the evening air cool against her skin as she made her way home. The city lights glimmered around her, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She thought of Carmen, of Sylvia, of the customers who had been overlooked, and the staff who had been silenced. Her footsteps slowed as she reached her front door, and she paused for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. The time for patience was nearing its end. Tomorrow she would return to the salon, not as a silent observer, but as the woman who owned it all. And when she did, nothing would be the same. The next morning, the salon opened as it always did, with a flurry of activity. The staff arrived early, their conversations muted as they prepared for another busy day. Miranda swept in last, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she surveyed the space. Her presence cast a chill over the room, silencing the murmurs of the stylists and assistants. "Let's make sure everything is perfect today," Miranda said briskly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the stations. "I don't want any slip-ups." Her voice carried a faint edge, as though she were bracing herself for something. Though she didn't mention Eleanor, her mind lingered on the older woman's quiet but unsettling presence from the day before. Miranda couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Eleanor than met the eye, but she quickly dismissed the thought. This was her salon, and she had no time for unwelcome distractions. Carmen worked in the back, her movements efficient but her thoughts elsewhere. She had barely slept the night before, her mind replaying Eleanor's visit and Sylvia's quiet defiance. For the first time, Carmen felt a spark of hope, a belief that things could be different, that perhaps she could stand up for herself and others like Sylvia had. But as she folded a stack of towels, the sound of Miranda's voice from the front made her flinch, and the doubt crept back in. By mid-morning, the salon was in full swing. Customers filled the chairs, chatting with stylists and flipping through magazines as the staff worked around them. The atmosphere seemed normal enough, but beneath the surface, a sense of anticipation lingered, unspoken, but undeniable. The door chimed softly, and for a moment, the noise of the salon faltered. Eleanor stepped inside, her presence as calm and composed as it had been the day before. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair pinned back elegantly. There was a quiet authority about her that seemed to shift the very air in the room. Miranda froze, her eyes widening slightly before she caught herself. She straightened her posture and forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Back again, I see," she said, her tone overly polite. "I wasn't expecting you." Eleanor returned her gaze steadily, her smile faint but warm. "I find that I enjoy observing how businesses operate," she said evenly. "And this one is fascinating." The words, though spoken gently, carried a weight that seemed to hang in the air. Miranda's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Well, as I mentioned yesterday, we're quite busy. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at another salon." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "You're very quick to dismiss people, aren't you?" she said softly. "But I wonder, is that how you treat all your customers, or just the ones you think don't belong?" The room fell silent, the chatter of customers and the hum of dryers fading into an uneasy stillness. Miranda's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady, though sharp. "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am. We have high standards here, and I simply ensure they're maintained." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "Standards are important," she agreed, her voice carrying an undertone of steel. "But respect is what keeps a business thriving. Without it, standards mean very little." Miranda opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the door chimed again. This time, two well-dressed individuals entered, a man and a woman in crisp business attire. They looked around briefly before their eyes landed on Eleanor, their faces lighting up with recognition. "Miss Eleanor," the man said warmly, approaching her with an outstretched hand. "It's good to see you." The staff exchanged confused glances, their eyes darting between Eleanor and the newcomers. Miranda's expression shifted from irritation to confusion, and then to unease. Eleanor shook the man's hand, her smile deepening slightly. "Thank you for meeting me here," she said. "I thought it would be helpful for you to see this location firsthand." The woman with the man stepped forward, her tone professional but firm. "We've been reviewing the reports from this salon, and I must admit there are significant concerns." Miranda's eyes widened, panic flickering in her expression. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "Who are you?" The woman turned to Miranda, her gaze cool. "I'm Vanessa, the regional director of operations for this franchise," she said. "And this is Marcus, our head of compliance." Miranda blanched, her confident facade crumbling. "Franchise?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand." Eleanor's smile softened, though her eyes remained sharp. She stepped closer to Miranda, her voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Let me clarify," she said. "I'm Miss Eleanor, the founder and owner of this entire franchise, and I've come here today to see why one of my salons has strayed so far from the values I built this company on." The room erupted into stunned silence, the weight of Eleanor's words settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. Miranda staggered back a step, her face pale as realization dawned. Carmen, watching from the back, felt a rush of vindication and awe as Eleanor's full power became evident. Eleanor turned to face the rest of the room, her voice carrying a calm authority that commanded attention. "This salon was meant to be a place where everyone feels valued and respected," she said. "But what I've seen here tells me that it's become something else entirely, and that is something I cannot allow to continue." Miranda's mouth opened and closed, her words failing her as Eleanor's steady gaze bore into her. The staff and customers watched in stunned silence, the weight of the moment sinking in. Eleanor had revealed the truth, and now, nothing would ever be the same. Miranda struggled to regain her composure, but her usually sharp wit failed her in the face of Eleanor's calm authority. The weight of the room's collective attention pressed heavily on her, and for the first time, she appeared unsure of herself. "Miss Eleanor," Miranda began, her voice shaky, I didn't realize." Eleanor raised a hand, silencing her with a gesture so gentle yet commanding that Miranda's words died in her throat. "That much," Eleanor said softly, "is clear." She turned her gaze to the rest of the room, her tone steady but imbued with an undercurrent of strength that demanded attention. "I started this business with a simple vision, to create a space where beauty was not just about appearances but about respect, dignity, and empowerment. A place where everyone, staff and customers alike, could feel valued." Her eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on Carmen, who stood frozen in the back, and then on Sylvia, who straightened under Eleanor's gaze, her expression resolute. "What I've seen here," Eleanor continued, "is a betrayal of that vision. A culture of exclusion, fear, and arrogance has no place in my salons." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable. Customers, too, shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly to one another. The truth in Eleanor's words resonated, cutting through the superficial glamour of the salon. Vanessa, the regional director, stepped forward, her voice firm but respectful. "Miss Eleanor," she said, "we've reviewed numerous complaints from both employees and customers about this location. There are reports of mistreatment, a hostile work environment, and poor management practices. The evidence is inextensive." Marcus, the head of compliance, nodded gravely. "And after what we've observed here today, it's clear that immediate action is needed." Miranda's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly, her voice rising. "I've been running this salon efficiently for years. We cater to high-end clients, and I ensure that we maintain the standards expected of us." Eleanor's expression didn't waver. She regarded Miranda with a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce through her defenses. "You've confused exclusivity with excellence," Eleanor said calmly, "and in doing so, you've turned this salon into a reflection of your own insecurities, rather than the values this company was built upon." Miranda flinched as though struck, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Eleanor turned her attention to the staff, her tone softening slightly. "To those of you who've endured this environment," she said, her gaze lingering on Carmen and Sylvia, "I want you to know that change is coming. This will be a place where your voices are heard, and your contributions are respected. No one should feel silenced or undervalued." Carmen felt a lump rise in her throat. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility that things could truly be different. Beside her, Sylvia gave a small nod, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. Eleanor straightened, her commanding presence filling the room. "Effective immediately," she announced. "Miranda is relieved of her duties as manager of this salon." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Miranda's eyes widened in disbelief, her hands trembling as she struggled to form a response. You can't, she began, but Eleanor cut her off with a calm but firm tone. I can, Eleanor said, and I have. Vanessa stepped forward holding a folder of documents. We'll be conducting a full audit of this location, she said. In the meantime, Sylvia will serve as interim manager while we assess the situation and make the necessary changes. Sylvia's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly composed herself, stepping forward with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to Miranda's flustered demeanor. Thank you, Sylvia said, her voice steady. I won't let you down. Eleanor nodded, her smile faint but approving. I believe you. Miranda stood rooted to the spot, her face a mixture of humiliation and fury. This isn't fair, she spat. I've worked too hard to be cast aside like this. Eleanor regarded her with a measured look. Fairness, she said softly, is ensuring that everyone in this salon is treated with respect and dignity. You failed to do that, Miranda. And now, it's time for someone else to lead. With that, Eleanor turned her attention to the rest of the room. To the staff, she said, I invite you to speak freely in the coming days. Your feedback will guide the changes we make here. And to the customers, I assure you that this salon will become a place you can truly enjoy. Not just for the services, but for the experience. The tension in the room began to lift, replaced by a sense of possibility. The staff exchanged cautious but hopeful glances, and even the customers seemed intrigued by the promise of something better. As Eleanor turned to leave, she paused near Carmen, her expression softening. You spoke up when it wasn't easy, she said quietly. That takes courage, don't lose that. Carmen's cheeks flushed and she nodded, her voice catching as she replied, Thank you, ma'am. Eleanor gave her a small, encouraging smile before stepping toward the door. The room watched in silence as she exited, the weight of her presence lingering long after she was gone. For the first time in a long while, the salon felt like it had the potential to become something more, a place where true beauty, in all its forms, could finally thrive. The door closed behind Eleanor, leaving a quiet stillness in her wake. Inside the salon, everyone remained rooted in place, as though still processing the monumental shift that had just occurred. Miranda stood frozen near the front desk, her face pale and her expression a mix of disbelief and simmering anger. Her carefully curated facade, once unshakable, had crumbled in front of the very staff and clients she had lorded over for years. Sylvia, now named the interim manager, took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. She felt the weight of the room's eyes on her, but also the faint warmth of encouragement from Eleanor's confident choice. She stepped forward, her voice steady but soft. Let's get back to work, everyone, she said. We've got a busy day ahead, and there's no reason our customers should feel the tension. Her words broke the spell, and slowly the room began to move again. Stylists resumed their tasks, customers settled back into their chairs, and the quiet murmur of conversation began to fill the air. Yet beneath the surface a subtle energy lingered, a spark of something new and hopeful. Carmen found herself gravitating toward Sylvia as the older woman moved to organize the schedule for the rest of the day. Sylvia, she said hesitantly, her voice low. Do you really think things will change? I mean, really change? Sylvia paused, turning to look at her. They already have, she said simply. Eleanor didn't just take down Miranda. She reminded all of us what this place is supposed to stand for. It's up to us now to live up to that. Carmen nodded slowly, her chest swelling with a mixture of hope and determination. I want to help, she said, her voice firmer this time. Whatever it takes. Sylvia's lips curved into a faint smile. Good, she said, because it's going to take all of us. Across town, Eleanor returned to her office in the corporate headquarters of her franchise. The space was understated yet elegant, much like Eleanor herself. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in natural light, and the shelves were lined with books on leadership, empowerment, and the history of beauty culture. A framed photo on her desk showed a younger Eleanor, standing proudly in front of her very first salon. She sat down at her desk and opened a notebook filled with meticulous handwritten notes. Her observations from the previous day were written neatly on one page, each detail carefully recorded. Staff dynamics, customer interactions, operational inefficiencies, and most importantly, the culture that had allowed someone like Miranda to thrive unchecked. Vanessa entered the office a moment later, holding a folder of reports. "Miss Eleanor," she said, placing the folder on the desk, "we've completed the initial audit for the location. The findings confirm what we suspected: numerous violations of company policy, high turnover rates, and customer dissatisfaction." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful but resolute. "None of this surprises me," she said. "The cracks in the foundation have been there for some time. What matters now is how we rebuild." Vanessa hesitated before speaking again. "Sylvia seems like a strong choice for interim manager," she said. "But do you think she can handle the pressure? The culture Miranda created won't disappear overnight." Eleanor's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Sylvia has the strength to lead," she said, "and she has something Miranda never did: respect from her peers. That will carry her far." Vanessa nodded, reassured by Eleanor's confidence. "We'll continue to monitor the location closely," she said, "and I'll ensure that Sylvia has the support she needs." "Good," Eleanor said. She closed the notebook and looked up, her gaze steady. "But remember, this isn't just about one salon. This is about the entire franchise. If there's rot in one branch, there may be rot elsewhere. We need to set a precedent that ensures this never happens again." Vanessa nodded, her expression serious. "Understood." As Vanessa left the office, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her mind already turning to the next steps. She had built her business on principles of inclusivity and empowerment, and she was determined to protect that vision no matter how much work it required. Her thoughts briefly returned to Carmen and Sylvia. They reminded her of herself in her early days. Carmen, full of potential but unsure of her own strength, and Sylvia, steady and determined despite the obstacles. They were the future of her franchise, and Eleanor would ensure they had the opportunity to thrive. She glanced at the photo on her desk, her younger self staring back at her with a mixture of determination and hope. Eleanor smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth passing through her. She had faced countless challenges to build what she had today, and she wasn't about to let anyone tear it down. "Onward," she murmured to herself, the word carrying both resolve and promise. And with that, she returned to her work, ready to shape the future of her empire with the same quiet power that had always defined her. Back at the salon, the day unfolded with an unusual quietness. The absence of Miranda's sharp commands created a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The staff seemed lighter, their movements less hurried, and their conversations less guarded. Sylvia, now interim manager, took the reins with a calm authority that was more reassuring than commanding. Carmen noticed the difference almost immediately. Sylvia approached tasks with a collaborative spirit, consulting the team before making decisions, and listening intently to their suggestions. When a customer complained about a mix-up in her appointment, Sylvia handled it with grace, offering an apology and a solution that left the woman smiling as she walked out the door. It wasn't lost on Carmen how much things had already begun to change. She felt a growing sense of pride as she worked through her tasks, knowing that she was part of something meaningful. The words Eleanor had spoken to her echoed in her mind. Don't lose that courage. At one point during a lull in activity, Sylvia gathered the staff in the break room. It was a small, cramped space that still bore the weight of Miranda's reign. Messy schedules pinned haphazardly to a corkboard, and a table cluttered with old coffee cups and ignored memos. But this time the room felt different. Sylvia stood at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on its surface. "I wanted to take a moment to talk," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I know the last few months, maybe even years, haven't been easy. But I want you all to know that things are going to change." The staff exchanged cautious glances, their expressions a mix of hope and skepticism. Sylvia continued, her tone firming. "We're not just here to fix hairstyles or apply makeup. We're here to make people feel good about themselves, to give them a place where they feel seen, valued, and respected. That includes all of us, too. If we don't feel that way as a team, how can we give that to our customers? Carmen felt a swell of emotion as she listened. Sylvia's words weren't just lip service. They carried the weight of someone who had experienced the same struggles they all had. One of the older stylists, a woman named Dana, crossed her arms. "That sounds nice and all," she said, her tone cautious. "But how do we know it'll stick? We've seen promises like this before." Sylvia nodded, acknowledging the skepticism. "I get it," she said. "Trust takes time, and I don't expect it to happen overnight. But this isn't just about me. Miss Eleanor herself is watching this salon closely. She cares about what happens here, and she's made it clear that we have her full support to make things right." The mention of Eleanor seemed to have a grounding effect on the group. Her presence the day before had left an undeniable impression, her words carrying a weight that few could dispute. "I'm asking for your help," Sylvia said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This isn't something I can do alone, but together we can rebuild this place into something we're all proud of." A silence hung in the room for a moment. Then Carmen spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "I'm in," she said. "I want to help make this place better." Her words seemed to break the tension, and one by one the others nodded or voiced their agreement. Dana, after a moment's hesitation, sighed and said, "All right, Sylvia. Let's see where this goes." Sylvia smiled, a flicker of relief passing over her face. "Thank you," she said. "Now let's get back out there and show our customers what this salon can really be." As the day went on, the staff began to work with a renewed sense of purpose. Customers noticed the difference too. The air felt warmer, the interactions more genuine, and the stylists more attentive. Compliments began to flow, and for the first time in a long while, smiles felt easy and unforced. Carmen found herself thriving under Sylvia's leadership. She spoke up more often, offering suggestions and helping where she could. Each small step forward felt like a personal victory, a reclamation of her confidence and worth. Toward the end of the day, as the last few customers were finishing up, a delivery arrived. A sleek black envelope with Eleanor's name embossed in gold lettering was handed to Sylvia. She opened it carefully, her brow furrowing as she read the note inside. "It's from Miss Eleanor," Sylvia said, looking up at the group. "What does it say?" Carmen asked, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Sylvia smiled as she read aloud. "Change begins with people who care. I'm proud of the first steps you've taken. Keep going. Your work is only just beginning." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. Then Sylvia looked around at the group, her smile growing. "Let's make sure we don't disappoint her." The staff nodded, a renewed determination settling over them. The salon, once a place of fear and exclusion, was beginning to transform. And with Eleanor's quiet but powerful support, they knew they were capable of far more than they had ever imagined. The days that followed marked the beginning of a profound transformation for the salon. Under Sylvia's steady leadership, the team began to find their rhythm, shedding the weight of Miranda's oppressive management. Each day brought small victories, a more relaxed atmosphere among the staff, genuine smiles exchanged between stylists and customers, and a growing sense of camaraderie that had been absent for so long. Carmen, in particular, began to come into her own. No longer afraid to speak up, she found herself stepping forward in ways that surprised even her. During a particularly busy afternoon, she noticed a bottleneck at the front desk and quickly organized the schedule to smooth things out. Sylvia caught her afterward and gave her an encouraging nod. "Well done, Carmen," Sylvia said. "That kind of initiative is exactly what we need." Carmen flushed with pride, her confidence building with each passing day. She began to see herself not just as a junior stylist, but as someone with the potential to lead. Eleanor's words continued to echo in her mind, a constant reminder to hold on to her courage. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained closely involved, though her presence was often felt more than seen. She had a way of appearing at the salon unannounced, her quiet demeanor belied by the impact of her visits. Each time she would spend a few hours observing, speaking softly with staff, and offering subtle yet impactful advice. One morning, she arrived just as the salon was opening. The staff, now used to her visits, greeted her warmly. Carmen, stationed at the front desk, beamed when she saw Eleanor enter. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor," Carmen said, her voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. "Good morning, Carmen," Eleanor replied, her tone warm. "How are things running today?" "Smoothly," Carmen said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Thanks to Sylvia, we've all found our stride." Eleanor nodded, her eyes scanning the room. She could see the difference. The way the staff moved with purpose and confidence. The way customers were greeted with sincerity rather than forced cheer. The salon was beginning to reflect the vision she had always intended, and it filled her with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She walked over to Sylvia, who was setting up her station for the day. "Sylvia," Eleanor said softly, "you've done an excellent job." Sylvia looked up, her expression both surprised and grateful. "Thank you, Miss Eleanor, but it's been a team effort. I couldn't have done it without everyone here." Eleanor smiled, her respect for Sylvia deepening. "Leadership is about bringing out the best in others," she said, "and you've done that beautifully." Sylvia straightened, her resolve strengthening. "We're just getting started," she said. "There's still so much more we can do." Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze steady. "And I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Later that day, as the salon bustled with activity, a familiar face walked through the door, Mrs. Langford. She paused near the entrance, her sharp eyes scanning the room. The salon looked different, not physically, but in its energy. The air was warmer, the atmosphere more inviting. She noticed the way the staff moved with confidence and purpose, their interactions with customers marked by genuine care. Sylvia approached her with a welcoming smile. "Mrs. Langford, it's good to see you again. Let me get you settled." Mrs. Langford raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "The place feels different," she remarked as she followed Sylvia to her usual station. Sylvia nodded, her smile widening. "We've been working hard to make some changes." Mrs. Langford glanced around again, her sharp gaze softening slightly. "I can see that," she said. "It's a change for the better." As Sylvia began her work, Mrs. Langford's words spread quietly among the staff. Her approval carried weight, and her recognition of the salon's transformation felt like a milestone. It was a moment that validated everything they had been working toward. By the end of the day, as the last customer left and the staff began cleaning up, Sylvia gathered them once again. This time, there was no tension in the air, only a shared sense of accomplishment. "We've come a long way in just a few weeks," Sylvia said, her voice steady but filled with pride. "And it's because of all of you, your dedication, your hard work. It's what's making this salon what it's meant to be." Carmen raised her hand slightly, a playful smile on her face. And Miss Eleanor's surprise visits might have helped a little too. The group chuckled, and even Sylvia couldn't suppress a grin. "Yes," she said, "Miss Eleanor's support has been invaluable. But make no mistake, this success is ours." The team erupted into applause, the sound filling the once oppressive break room with a sense of joy and possibility. For the first time in a long while, they felt like more than just co-workers. They felt like a team. As they filed out for the evening, Carmen lingered behind, her gaze falling on the sleek black envelope still pinned to the corkboard. Eleanor's words, "Your work is only just beginning," seemed to glow under the soft light. She smiled to herself, her heart full of resolve. Whatever came next, she knew she was ready to face it. Together, they all were. The salon had transformed from a tense, hierarchical environment into a vibrant, welcoming space, a beacon of the values Eleanor had envisioned when she first built her empire. Word of the changes spread quickly, drawing new customers eager to experience the warmth and professionalism that now defined the place. Former customers who had left due to Miranda's dismissiveness began to return, surprised and pleased by the new atmosphere. Eleanor watched from a distance. Her presence felt even when she wasn't physically there. She received regular updates from Sylvia, who reported not just on the salon's numbers, but on the morale and camaraderie of the team. For Eleanor, these updates were more satisfying than any revenue report. One sunny morning, Eleanor decided to visit the salon unannounced once more. This time, she came not to observe, but to celebrate the progress they had made. She arrived just as the day was beginning, her presence immediately drawing smiles from the staff. "Miss Eleanor," Carmen greeted her warmly, rushing to the door. "You didn't tell us you were coming today." "I wanted to see how everyone's doing," Eleanor replied, her voice warm. She glanced around, taking in the lively energy of the salon. "And it looks like things are running beautifully." "They are," Carmen said proudly. "Sylvia's been incredible, and everyone's really stepped up. It's been inspiring." Eleanor smiled, her gaze softening. "You've all inspired me," she said. "And today, I wanted to share something special." She gestured toward the door, where Vanessa, the regional director, and Marcus, the head of compliance, entered carrying a large plaque. It was sleek and elegant, with bold letters etched into the surface. Sylvia approached, her brow furrowing in curiosity. "What's this?" she asked. Eleanor turned to the team, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This salon is officially being recognized as a flagship location for the franchise," she announced. "It will serve as an example of what every one of our salons should strive to be, a place of respect, inclusion, and excellence." The staff erupted into cheers, the applause echoing through the room. Sylvia's eyes shimmered with emotion as Vanessa handed her the plaque. She read the inscription aloud, "To the team that turned vision into reality, proving that true beauty lies in the people who create it." Sylvia looked at Eleanor, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in us." Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've all earned this," she said. "This is just the beginning." As the celebration died down, Eleanor stayed behind for a quiet moment with Carmen. The young stylist had grown immensely in the past few weeks, and Eleanor could see the confidence radiating from her. "You've come a long way," Eleanor said, her tone gentle but proud. "How do you feel?" Carmen smiled, her eyes bright. "Like I can do anything," she said, "and like I finally belong." Eleanor's gaze softened. "You always belonged, Carmen," she said. "You just needed to see it for yourself." The two women shared a smile, the kind that carried understanding and promise. Eleanor knew that Carmen, like Sylvia and the rest of the team, was destined for great things. As Eleanor left the salon that day, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The transformation of this single location was more than just a victory. It was a testament to the power of belief, resilience, and the courage to demand better. The franchise was stronger for it, and so was she. Walking down the street, Eleanor paused for a moment and looked back. The salon glowed in the morning light, alive with the energy of a team that had reclaimed its purpose. She smiled to herself, her heart light. The journey wasn't over, but Eleanor knew they were on the right path. And as she continued down the street, her mind turned to the next salon, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to make a difference. Her legacy was more than the empire she had built. It was the people she had empowered to carry it forward, and in that she found her greatest pride. In the end, this isn't just a story about a woman being underestimated. It's a testament to the power of dignity, resilience, and quiet strength. Miss Eleanor's experience at the salon highlights a truth we all need to remember. Appearances can be deceiving, and respect should never be conditional. She could have retaliated with anger, but instead she chose to teach a lesson that spoke louder than any argument ever could. Her calm revelation that she owned the entire franchise didn't just expose the arrogance and prejudice in that room. It reminded everyone present, and all of us watching, that true power lies in knowing your worth and standing firm in your values. It's a lesson for the staff who learned the importance of respect, for the customers who saw judgment replaced with humility, and for the countless others who now understand that true beauty lies in how we treat one another. This story leaves us with a challenge: to lead with empathy, to see beyond the surface, and to never forget that everyone we encounter carries a story worth respecting. As Miss Eleanor proved, the quietest voices often carry the greatest strength and the ability to change everything.